It's just coming in. It's just about you.
I can, yes. Good afternoon. I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. Though, I can't hear anyone in the room other than you, Alex. But when people are saying yes, they're here, we're not hearing them. But that might be because they're not pressing the button at the moment. That's fine. Yeah, can hear you now. Thank you. Perfect.
Of the report, well, as you know, because these numbers are draft at the moment, as we're still working on year end, and they are unaudited, so they will potentially subject to change. The first section of it is in regard to revenue, so the income that we are expecting to get through it. You can see the major differences we have on the report is the ERDF growth service grant that it was behind of 2.1 million from budget, and the ESF growth service grant as well, that is 344,000 pounds behind. These were both behind due to limited usage for the growth core organization. In relation to the other big variances, that is the LEP co-funding, we all knew that at the moment was actually paused, so we'll see as soon as coming back. In relation to how we spend our spends in revenue, the biggest variance, again, you can see is the growth core services. We know that there have been some up and down, but overall the performance towards what is their performance, that is how many jobs we created, is actually still very good, despite actually the expenditure will be behind overall. Other variances are reasonably small anyway on the various line. In regard to capital, you can see again, the GovCo is making an appearance as the major contributor to the variance, and this is 4.8 million pounds of variance on an overall 11 million pounds worth of budget. This is again mostly due to delays in the equity service line within growth services. which was now is catching up, is actually working reasonably well compared with what we had before. As we all know, the equity had a problem because the funds that we could give weren't quite appropriate in the first place, and the service wasn't provided at the standard we wanted to. Other major variants here, you have the Illumina, sorry, and the Star Codom, both of them mostly due to the idea that we didn't find the appropriate candidate to actually receive the funds we wanted to provide them for. But this is going to carry forward in the future years, so we will definitely find somebody. Table 4 show our activity through the market towns that is not covered by the board, but anyway of very high importance here and for the region and for everybody. The delays that we capture in the past on these due to the pandemics and the cost of living and all these things, you can still see them in the effect, but sure, we're spending them. Dom will make sure that we spend them. On a capital budget, at the bottom you have the EU budget and capital program. This didn't change really from the last time we saw it, so there is nothing particular relevant, particular interest on this. And then the nice news, that is always the money we can actually decide what to do with, so the enterprise zone funds that they were regionally adjusted based on the idea that this year we got a little bit less than we were expecting. So we got just shy of 9 million instead, and just shy of just shy of 900,000 instead of just shy of 1 million, which means we adjusted for the future year. But even then, it still gives us a good amount of money that we can reinvest, and make our hair more profitable. That's me. Thank you.
Do you want to come off, Bruno,
Oh,
on
sorry.
your just for a second? Thank you. Questions? Al, you've got one.
There we go. Technology, too much for me. Thank you. I was going to ask, there's some really clear, obvious, significant items where there's a clear explanation on variance, but there's other areas where there's quite a lot of sway in terms of budget versus actuals. I wondered whether there were any lessons or changes that we were thinking of that would give us the ability to tighten down those budget forecasts in future years, or are they expected variances at this point in the year?
As part of it were expected variances, of course. Part of it learning to understand better our profiles is important and reasonably new, so I will tie them up in the future, definitely. But also we are developing in finance a new model that allowed us to profile the budget and the forecast going forward. So we will have more of an understanding by month of variances, which definitely help to understand better, well, the overall situation is that and the slippage at the end of the year.
Well, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add, really, I think one of the key things for us in terms of the variance that's been mentioned is the need for, I think, greater collaboration actually with the local authorities, and I think that's really starting to happen now. There's been more joint meetings between the combined authority and its constituent member authorities, and I think that will help enormously in terms of getting some of these projects much more quickly over the line. Because I think what happens is that iteration needs to take place between some of the funding that we secure from government that then is handed down to the individual local authorities to spend, and we become a bit dependent on the speed at which that spend takes place. But I think if we could put more collaborative effort into understanding and iterating those arrangements, we will get much more on track.
One thing to pick up on the points that Bruno and Richard have just made, which I think might go to part of your point, Al, is if that's starting to happen, which sounds very positive, it would also be really useful for there to be a kind of line of sight of what's happening there into this meeting, because we've got an ongoing need to try and track how that's happening. So it sounds very positive. It'd be good to kind of keep sight of that as it goes forward. I'll come back.
I think that's really helpful, and I think that the more we can close that feedback loop, then the more accurate it'll be. And I guess the reason why I look at it is there's significant investment across our market towns and region. And if we've got a disconnect between when we anticipate expenditure and investment versus actual, that has a equal knock on to when we anticipate impact and when we can measure that. So I think that alignment of the two is really important.
Thanks, Al, and thanks, Richard and Bruna. Any other questions or comments on this item? I've seen no other indications. So essentially we are, the recommendation is simply to note the financial position, which we've done. A couple of important points in that last exchange, which would be good to make sure we minute, because effectively there's some actions coming forward from that, picking up on the points that Richard was making in particular. But essentially, as this recommendation is just to note, I will assume we can all agree it has indeed been noted. Great, thank you. And thank you, Bruna, for your time. Thanks. Okay, Bruna, if you want to just come off, you're still on. Thank you. That's all right. That takes us on to item 3.1. Steve, I think you're going to lead off for this on the strategic funding review. So over to you.
Indeed. Good afternoon. That's working. So this is the usual regular update that the board receives on its strategic funding programmes. This report covers progress to the 31st of March. In the report, it actually says 21st of Feb, so I will just correct that myself. It's to the 31st of March. And whilst it covers the usual things on spend performance, the monitoring of projects, there's a bit in there about strategy for investing remaining recycled funding, and then a general update across several funds. I'll draw out a few points from the report to note for the board. So table 3.2 actually shows the spend currently of recycled projects and projects that are drawing funding. So at the moment, we're at that 3.2 million spend against a budget of 12 that was awarded by the Busines Board. And to Al's point, you can pick out the projects which have a zero spend to date. So the Business Growth Service inward investment expansion, that 400,000 has now been claimed and paid over since this report was written. The College of West Anglia Net Zero project awarded 2 million. There's nil spend. That's because the Luff bid with Fenland Council was unsuccessful, which it is part of, and there is a project change request coming for this, and I'll talk about that in a second. The Ramsey Produce Hub, that one is tied to a Shared Prosperity Fund project, so 2 funding streams tied for that project. Again, it's one where we're liaising closely with Huntingdonshire District Council, as once the Shared Prosperity Fund comes into train, this funding will then be released on starting the project. And then finally, the University of Peterborough Phase 3 at the bottom, which is very pertinent as we're sat here. This is 2 million towards the Phase 3. This won't be drawn until the Luff funding has been spent first, so that may well sit at the zero for some time yet. All the other projects obviously are spent or are on profile to spend. In terms of other parts in the report, I noted the College of West Anglia, because of the unsuccessful Luff bid, to which the 2 million is leveraging. The College of West Anglia are just looking at their options, and they're going to bring forward a project, possibly of slightly smaller scale, using modular build, and we'll be bringing forward a project change request to the board next meeting in July for the board to agree that the project can continue, potentially using that 2 million with some other sources of funding that they've been able to raise from the private sector. In terms of monitoring of all projects in the programme, Business Board strategic programme, we've continued obviously to do the monitoring. The latest monitoring data is attached to this report at Appendix 1. The total number of jobs and apprenticeships that it's currently tracking shows 12,179. So trajectory is still in the right direction on that. I mentioned about our recycled local growth fund. The board has circa around 4 million left to allocate in the medium term, as well as enterprise own receipt income. We had a discussion at the 24th of April informal business board meeting about options, but it was resolved at that meeting to set up a subgroup of the business board to work harder on the options and look at what our strategy should be with that funding. There's a date provisionally set for the 25th of May to have that first subgroup meeting, and I'd like to thank those members who have already volunteered to be a part of that. Community Renewal Fund, one of our other programmes, now complete, and nationally all CRF is closed. At Appendix 2A and 2B to this report, we have the final evaluation reports. In the main, both the projects we funded out of CRF were very successful. The Start and Grow, which was the largest CRF project in the country, beat all of its targets, although there was a slight variation between the districts in terms of how the funding and grants in the end came to be. And some of that was because it's a learning point, costs more to deliver the outcomes in our rural and more deprived areas like Fenland than it did to deliver them in the other parts of the programme. The Turning Point, whilst it showed a small underspend at the end, actually exceeded outputs, particularly with the number of individuals that it helped with training vouchers or internships. So in the end, very successful. The Combined Authority, we've also received some levelling up funding, capability and capacity funding. That's a small, well, not really, but 1.125 million to help enhance our capability and capacity to not only deliver the existing levelling up fund bids that are out there, but also to develop our capabilities with evidence and work on pipeline of projects and tools to manage projects going forwards. And so I'd obviously like to thank DLUC for that extra bit of capability and capacity funding. And then just finally, within the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, I would draw attention of the board to the fact that DLUC confirms the allocation of 3.2 million for rural England prosperity funding. That was in April. Whilst we're yet to see a funding agreement from the department, we are working with our local authority partners on the processes for managing and deploying that grant funding scheme. So I'll stop there and happily take any questions.
Hi, with the College of West Anglia project, does that 2 million come back around for review, or does it remain allocated and then they can just change their project?
Okay, yeah, so currently as it stands, obviously they have a funding agreement with us for 2 million, but it was based on 2 million on a bigger project that included 6 million of levelling up funding included. What the project change request will be coming back to the board to say, okay, the project will slightly change in size, scope. The net zero training outputs will remain the same, but it's just going to be a slightly smaller project in terms of scale. And it's in the board's gift to approve that change, and then we modify the grant funding agreement to say it's now a smaller project. Or if you decline it, then yes, that money comes back, and we then decide what to do with it.
And Mike, that makes that clear. I think it is in the end, formally, it needs to come back to the board for a decision, because the project is now not the one that we signed off originally, which was expecting of the match funding that's not now there. So we reconsider and assess whether that's still a desirable set of outcomes that we wish to pursue. I had one linked question, Steve, on the table 3.2, and it kind of goes to what Mike was just talking about, really, because the way the table's got this, you've got something like that, that kind of project we just talked about around the Cower programme, where we've got our allocation of 2 million. There's a match fund listed in the table. Nothing's yet been spent. But in a sense, that project is quite different to University of Peterborough Phase 3, where we've allocated 2 million. It's the last bit of money in the queue, and the other funding gets spent first. So it's of a different status, if you like, to the project 3 above it. And I wonder whether something we could do in the table that just recognises. Do you see what I'm getting at? There's a difference between those two, but they look the same on the way it's presented. So you're not.
Yes, absolutely agree. I think, yes, maybe the table, we've simplified it so that you don't get the board, don't have too much information. But I guess you're right, you know, some kind of indicator of whether it's on track.
Yeah, that's the point.
Or not, I guess, would be useful. So no, we'll take that away.
The follow-up, part of what prompted me about that 2 million was that as we go back to look at recycled funds, and we have another set of projects to rank against, then that project might not look as good as some of the new ones we're looking at. So I wondered if it's looked at within a new perspective.
Okay, right. No, that's a really good point, and I guess it's a question of timing in a way, and also it's in the board's gift, I suppose, whether you want to entertain that project change request as it presents, or whether to wait and see if there are other projects potentially you want to look against. I mean, obviously the board approved the existing College of West End, but based on its strategic fit, based on its outcomes and everything else. So I guess it's to what degree do they still fit, and if they've changed or not.
And just as a reminder, Mike, I mean, of course, we've looked at other project change requests in the past and felt that things had changed so much that actually it no longer felt like it was the fit that it was at the point the board originally approved it. And that is an option available to us. So obviously, we shouldn't preclude the consideration of the issues at hand when they come forward properly in July. But there is always that question about there's an opportunity cost from whatever choice we make, which needs to come through. Any other questions and comments? Yes, Tina.
So I just wondered what's happening with this Ramsey Produce Hub, because it's not spent any money either, and maybe I missed it in the paper.
It's a work. There you go. Yes, so it's capital in the main here that's being used in the project, and it's being supported by some revenue funding that's coming through the shared prosperity route locally on the ground. And it's with the shared prosperity fund that they were building the project team and putting in place the building blocks for some of the work they wanted to do, like planning permission, because it's all high street regeneration. So one sort of triggers the other. In the submission, I mean, they had a reasonable time frame. I don't have it exactly to hand, but I recall they had quite a reasonable time frame to deliver the project. So I would think they're not in a critical path place yet, in that sense.
Thanks, Steve. Was that all right, Tina? Just before I come to you, Al, can I just check? And Andy and Belinda, can you hear us okay? Because we're having a bit of issue with the mics, but can you broadly hear us?
Absolutely fine, thank you. Yeah.
Great. And the other thing is I can't see if you're indicating. So if you could just jump in if you want to make a contribution or ask a question, just kind of dive in and we'll make it work. Or somebody can indicate, because I've got no visual of you.
Can we also dive in and say it would be very helpful if people could say who they are when they're speaking, because you're quite a long way away, so we can hear really clearly, but you're just a big table.
Right, thanks, Anna. Yeah, we'll try to do that. So I'll either introduce people or they can introduce themselves as they come in. Okay, thanks, guys online. Sorry about this being a bit tricky as a virtual meeting. Al, I think so. Al Kingsley wants to speak.
It's Al here. Thank you. Yeah, I think the 2 points are interlinked. I think Mike's point is really valid, that in an ideal world, there would be a percentage of deviation from the original project before which it should go back in the pot for comparison. I know it's not quite so straightforward as that, and that's why there's that process, but I think it's a really important one. But on quite a few of these projects, they're interlinked, whether the match funding is kind of, well, you've got to get this for us to be able to get the other part of it. And I just wonder, with one of our drivers, not least obviously focusing on having impact, but being the timescale of impact, and actually whether there are different measures or thresholds we should be setting in terms of either a timeline for work to have started, or perhaps we shouldn't be the first part of the funding that gets agreed. The other parts have to be. I know that's probably making it, how many plates is we expecting Steve to spin? But I'm just mindful that we could be looking a year down the line with lots of really innovative projects, but none started. And the question would then be, so how much impact have you made collectively with those resources? And the answer, best intention, would be zero.
Yeah, no, I was just going to thank Al for that. I mean, I think that's something we've had to consider all along with the projects and our funding agreements. If we enter into something and it's obviously contingent on other things happening, then we invariably mark those in the funding agreement as reasons why we might claw the money back if there's non-delivery of securing those. So, but I do take your point. There's, in terms of comparison and measuring the time frame, yeah, we've always got to be alive to that.
Just a final one, that is, I wonder whether there's a measure for balance, the number of projects, which ones are dependent on other funding sources and which aren't, so that we don't ever leave. I don't think that's the case now anyway, to be fair, but that might be something to consider in future to find that mix.
Yeah, I mean, that seems a really sensible point, Al, to think about as we go. Steve, you can just come off for a sec because you're still on, and I'll ask Rebecca Stevens to comment. Rebecca.
Yeah, just picking up on that, and without wanting to create a cottage industry around it, because I'm aware that we're not in the same position with funds to give away, but normally I'd probably think that I'd be saying something like, what could we learn from this for when we do it next time, and whether there's, like Micah said, a threshold, or whether we set ourselves some rules or some guidelines around that, because there are a few of them, and other projects will have not gone forward because we put the money into these projects, and you know, best intentions at the point in time, but what is the learning?
Yeah, you're getting nods and thumbs up from people. I'll come to Mike Hurd. Mike.
Just another quick one. I've sort of seen it elsewhere where sort of you're almost judged on how much leverage funding you bring in. And I wondered how important that is in terms of our funders, especially as the funding environment is changing, for us to be able to show how much additional private and other public funding is being brought in by our.
Yeah, we do, and we do collect that, the amount of funding that we leverage. And I think in the monitoring appendix that is attached to the report, I think it does actually state how much millions of pounds has been leveraged through the local growth fund funding stream. So we do collect that. I think if the board recalls, we did run the call last year for this particular recycled funding, call for bids that needed funding to leverage other funding, which is why I think we got these types of bids in this tranche that are all contingent on other funding.
It was less about whether we monitor it, it's whether being judged on it.
Yeah, do you want to come in, Rob?
Yeah, thank you. There's no funding that officially has that as a output at the moment of any of the streams the business board have. There has been in the past. Completely gone blank. The large capital fund the business board has had to allocate, local growth fund, did have that as one of its core monitoring, but not official outputs. What's more commonly looked at is the scale of the outputs and the effectiveness. And obviously, if you're putting 2 million in and unlocking 28 million, you'd hope you're getting value for money there by delivering 10 times as much as you would by putting 2 million in. So
in my experience, government rarely puts match funding as an actual output that you're trying to obtain, but they definitely keep a very close eye on it.
Great, thank you, everybody. Any further questions or comments for Steve on this report?
Just very, am I on? Just very briefly, just to say that what the combined authority is intending to do is move to a single assurance framework within which there will be a single investment fund, and if we move to that model, every project will be treated in a very similar way and will follow through a pathway of gateways, which will enable things like that to be picked up regardless of whether it's part of central criteria or not. So I think we're moving in the right direction in the future.
Richard, and I think that would go a long way to addressing some of the points that Al and Rebecca were both making earlier on. So that feels helpful as an evolution as we move forward, even in a world where there may be less absolute funding going through. We should even more maybe making sure we're trying to allocate it effectively using a set of criteria that can be clearly understood by everybody. Okay, I think we'll call that item to a close. And again, the recommendation before us is simply to note the updates that Steve has given us. So I assume we can all accept that we have indeed noted those items. So thank you, Steve. That takes us on to item 3.2, which is around the recruitment of a new chair of the business board, a constitution amendment. Essentially, this is happening because it's about confirming arrangements following my resignation as chair, and this is my last business board meeting. And Andy Neely as vice chair will temporarily step up as chair. Thank you, Andy, for taking that on. And hopefully there'll be a permanent appointment being made in the summer. Mike Hurd, again, thank you, Mike, has agreed also to temporarily step up as acting vice chair while Andy is acting chair. So we've got cover should Andy be unable to attend a meeting. However, there's quite a lot of issues around the question here, and particularly the work that the recruitment agency has already done. So before we go into the paper itself, I'd just like to ask Richard Kenny to give an update on the work we've been doing around this on recruitment, because that may be pertinent to our considerations. So Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so just a quick step back, just to remind us, this is a really not just a big appointment for the future of this board, but for the future of the combined authority, for the future of the region, for the future of relationships with government as we enter into a new period of devolution. If we go back to the spring statement, it was very clear that the government was committing very hard to deeper devolution. There's very much an issue around future trailblazer devolution deals. And even if we do have a general election, it looks like there's a race between the different political parties to see who can contribute or add most to the devolution agenda. So I think this is going to be a really key role moving forwards for the future of the board, and particularly when we come on to some of the discussions later in this meeting about governance and so on, in terms of the business board taking a more advisory role across the whole business of the combined authority and supporting the mayor in those negotiations with government. So just wanted to sort of set that out as to why this is such a strategic and important role for us moving forwards. So in terms of taking it forward, we decided to appoint Penna to lead on this process because Penna dominate the market, both in terms of non-executive director appointments. They dominate the market in terms of local government and in terms of business networks. So we felt that Penna were at the top of the range in terms of being a recruitment consultancy that could help us with this. Despite their best endeavours, they haven't been able to come up with candidates that meet all of the requirements that are set out in terms of the private sector requirements that are built into our constitution, which is the combined authorities constitution. The business board's constitution is annexed to that constitution. And as a result of which, it's left us in this position really as to what do we do given the nature of our constitution, and given that we haven't been able to find someone of the caliber of our previous chair who is stepping out of the seat to move us on. So I think in light of that, but having said that, I suppose what I would say is that Penna haven't had a long time in which to do that. It's been quite a squeezed window of opportunity within which to do that. So what we thought and what the independent expert advice was in terms of moving this forward was to look at the constitution and look at what other areas are doing across the rest of the country. And we feel that the existing constitution is probably more restrictive than elsewhere in other parts of the country. Having said that, we felt that, you know, at the same time, we've only been round the loop in a very short window of opportunity. So what we could do is we could go back out to the market for another period within which we would go round again and see where we were in relation to further endeavours to enable us to find a suitable chair. And then at the end of that process, I guess if we've been round again, we then might want to consider where we sit against the existing constitutional arrangements. So that would be where we've got to. In terms of the numbers, I mean, Penna have talked to at least 27 key people across the patch, and they've identified some key people, but none of which meet those requirements.
Great, thank you, Richard. I mean, from what you've said, it sounds like there may be merit in trying to, before we consider actually the paper that's before us, trying to go back to Penna, shake the can again, see whether we can find someone who would be suitable, who fits the existing criteria, rather than make this decision now, which essentially is a potential change to what we've got here, would be a deferral of this until that further check, further kind of consultation with Penna and further engagement had happened. I mean, that is a sort of change to what we've got before us, but any comments on that proposition?
Alex, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Andy, I'll come to Tina, then I'll come to you next.
Yeah, sure.
Do you mean that it would be deferred to be brought up again at another business board meeting, rather than we are deferring it and we are giving you the... Because I personally feel really uncomfortable about the idea that somebody who's simply resident here could take that role.
Just before coming to Andy, I think, just to be really clear, I think from what Richard's just said, the proposal would be to not consider the item before us at this stage, allow the further work with Penna to be undertaken to see whether we can recruit on the existing constitution basis, which was the way that the advert was set out in the first place. And should that fail, we may have to come back to this question, but we don't need to come to it now because we haven't exhausted the potential for the recruitment on the current basis, I think is the proposition that's coming out from this exchange. I'll come to Andy and then we can come back round again. Andy?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree with that as the sort of direction of travel. It was going to be a question for Richard, and this may just be, Richard, a function of the relatively limited amount of time that Penna have had to go hunting. But I would be really happy to talk to them with suggestions of names. They certainly haven't been in touch with me to ask for views, and I'm not sure how many colleagues on the business board they've been in touch with, but I think a bit more rattling of the can locally might be good.
Alex, I have a comment as well when it's my turn. It's Belinda.
Belinda, do you want to come in now and then I'll ask Richard to come back on both points?
It was just a little piece of anecdotal feedback. I have been approached by two people who had been approached in respect of this role, and I don't think they were massively impressed by the way the role was presented to them. So I would just want that, I think, as everyone else is saying, we have a lot of other questions before we start changing the constitution as regards how we've got where we are in the story so far.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Belinda. I'll come back to Richard first, and then Mike, if you want to come in, I'll come to you. But Richard first.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we can require Penna to actually make contact with board members. I think that would be the right thing to do, to give every board member an opportunity to feed into the process. I'm surprised that Penna haven't done that. It would normally be good practice. So that is feedback that you know we will take on board. And similarly, in relation to the other comment about how it's being presented as part of that, I will also feed that back to Penna as well. So we will take account of that. But clearly, I think we need to have those conversations with Penna.
Mike?
Just to ask if there had in fact been any feedback from them in terms of whether it was financial, whether it was time commitments, whether it was governance issues, as to why they were getting a poor response.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether Domenico wants to comment on that because he's been more deeply involved in the day to day. But yeah, I mean, it's a very good question.
We haven't had that breakdown yet. It's something that we're going to be seeking from Penna to have that feedback, because at the moment we were just given the final shift of candidates, so we're just trying to figure out what we were doing in terms of the next steps, and then we will obviously follow up with that kind of level of feedback.
Thanks, Dom. Vic.
Yeah, hi. For those online, Vic, repeating what you said, this whole thing is a bit of a concern to me. The fact that we've got a paper in front of us, and I know there's a possibility we could defer this paper, but the fact that we've got this proposal that none of us have seen any of the candidates, none of us have been involved in this process. The process was horrendously delayed, and it was delayed so that the new chair could. No, it wasn't delayed for that reason. I can't remember the reason for the delay, but it was a horrendous delay as well. And from where I sit, I'd actually like to kick this paper out straight away, because like Tina, I don't feel comfortable at all with what this amendment is proposing, and I don't want to defer this amendment so that somehow it then comes back up on the table at some later stage. I want us to go all in. They've absolutely got to be engaged in the business agenda directly in Cambridgeshire, not resident only. It could be someone who's retired 10 years ago would qualify then.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. Understood. I mean, I think from the point of view of what we do now, it makes little difference. If we're basically saying we do not wish to consider this issue at the moment because there is more to be done under the current constitution, more to be done with working with Penna to try to get the best possible field of candidates, this may never come back. The only reason I'm saying defer it is essentially, I think it's the easiest way forward at the moment. It allows the work we just described to happen, and I don't want to rule in or out any future position. In fact, you can't really, because it could be that if absolutely nothing comes forward, maybe there is a need to look at the issue in some other way, because in the end we're going to need a chair, because Andy's very kindly stepping up to do this, but he doesn't want to do it full time. He doesn't have the bandwidth to do it full time, and we need to make sure we've got a process that yields an answer. But in a sense, I think that's almost a moot point, because if we agree that we're going to not consider the paper before us, but take the steps we've just taken, hopefully that yields the right outcome. Then if it were to come back, the point you just made would be one that could be made by you and other members of the board, and in the end the decision, of course, is one that would be a recommendation from the business board into the combined authority before any constitutional amendment was to be made, if I've understood that right. But sorry, Vic, come back.
Thank you. Because it's the AGM, we have to make the constitutional amendments today, I believe. If that's not correct, I welcome a correction. So if we don't do it now, it can't come back until next year. But for me, I really do feel that this proposal should be turned down. I don't feel it should be deferred. And I would welcome colleagues' views on that, even though I do appreciate what you're saying. It's almost a moot point. It's not. It's changing fundamentally the nature of the chair of the business board and business board member roles that, I fundamentally disagree with.
I'll come to Al.
Thank you, it's Al. I won't sit on the fence like Vic with his opinion on that. No, I mean, I would absolutely support that. I think fundamentally this has all been about being invested in the region, and I think invested means both being based here but actually having experience and understanding of the current landscape. The one thing I do think, without wishing to preempt subsequent conversations on the agenda, is it's perfectly reasonable to go back and have a greater window of time for Penna to seek suitable candidates. But I still think if you want to get the right people, you also need to reflect on what that role is and what level and how that can deliver impact, because there needs to be as much a purpose as there is an offer to it, and that perhaps hasn't been signposted as effectively as it could.
That would accord with the informal feedback that Belinda gave us as well, I think. Just on a point of the question about whether this is the sort of thing that can only be considered by the business board at this meeting with a recommendation into the combined authority board meeting at the next meeting, is that a one-off annual opportunity or not? Can anyone help on that point? Rena?
Okay. We just looked at the constitution, and the business board is able to make changes to the constitution, but it doesn't specify it has to be at the AGM. So it can be at any time, but it will have to come to the business board and then follow the process. Yeah.
Alex, may I ask a question? Belinda online.
Belinda.
Given where we are and your departure and Andy's sanity, do we need some scenario planning? Because we all very much hope and expect that we will get a handful of exceptional candidates and a field to choose from. If that is not the case, do we have a plan B?
Thanks, Belinda. And I suppose in a sense, this was why this paper was being brought, was to give another option should that fail. Although we've had quite a strong sense from some board members that that would seem to be undesirable. But essentially, there's probably some of what we're exploring now is what would the plan be. But the plan A is to go around the loop with Penna and really try to get someone. I'll come to Andy Williams. I think, Al, did you want to come back as well? So, Rebecca, sorry. So Andy Williams first, then Rebecca. Andy.
Yeah, I understand we should probably have a plan B. I think what we're saying is this paper isn't it.
Thanks, Andy. Rebecca.
Just to ask as well then, we're a number of members short. We've got a few member vacancies, and my understanding was that we'd delayed those to get the chair in first. Is that still the plan? Because that then delays the new members coming on board and sharing the love.
So we've asked Penna to keep that in mind as part of the candidate pool. As part of the candidate pool that they've identified and working with. So if they're not right for the chair of role, they will be considered, or see if they are considerable for a member. Specifically looking at sectors, gaps that we have in the board.
But we're only going out for a chair. So those people who might be interested in being a member, not a chair, and not considered at this point.
Yeah. But we might want to recruit them all at the same time.
I think there's a clear view in the room that we should absolutely go back to Penna in the way that Richard was describing at the beginning. I don't hear any dissent from that point. Yeah, sorry, Nitin, because I just check just before we move on to that. Can I just check that no one's dissenting from the let's try again with Penna position? You are dissenting. Okay, come in then, Nitin.
Challenging rather than dissenting. I mean, we all go and employ people. If they've failed miserably, which it sounds like, and they're quite a popular company, I understand, why keep on going to them? I'm sorry, but, as a business, you won't do that, I don't think. I won't, certainly. And we keep on doing it. So why Penna?
Richard, I mean, you kind of explained why Penna at the beginning of the session, but
Alex.
Yeah, Andy, come on.
Yeah. So, Nitin, I was going to pick up on the Plan B option. I mean, I'm assuming that Penna's contract is such that we can go back to them and say, actually, you haven't helped us find a suitable chair yet. Here's what we were looking for. Carry on looking. If they don't come back with somebody suitable, then I think you could look to another recruitment consultancy to support this particular process. But I would push Penna a little bit to just really do the job that they've been hired to do. And it may well be that we just didn't give them enough time. And as I say, I think we collectively can also, if they reach out to us, can give us some support as well for that. But I wouldn't keep going with it. If I'll give them one more run round the track race basically on this to see if we can find somebody. We must be able to find somebody in the region who's will be a good. They won't be as good as Alex, but a suitable chair for the business board.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we need to put a bit more pressure on Penna and give them one more bite of the cherry, give them one more opportunity to go around the loop and to require them to talk to business board members, should business board members be able to make themselves available. then that should enable us to get a better sort of state of play in terms of what is available and what isn't available. I suppose, I mean, we shouldn't be too harsh on all of this, because some of the candidates that they did put forward did have close links to businesses in the area. They are, closely aligned, or historically have got close connections to Cambridgeshire. And, there was a lot of hard work, I think, went into try to meet the requirements. And I think the feeling was, that we were in reality a bit of an outlier in terms of the degree to which we set out that criteria. But the criteria is the criteria. I think if we go around the loop one more time, putting a bit more pressure on Penna, making sure that we get proper engagement with the business board and other people engaged in the wider combined authority, we should be able to secure some good candidates.
But to be clear, I mean, inherent in what you've said, Richard, and picking up Andy's points, and I think reflecting some of Nitin's points, should that not yield an answer, we're not wedded to Penna. We would be able to use other recruitment agencies are available and could be utilised were they not to be succeeding.
Alex, just sorry to jump in again. I'm on the Penna website now, and third on their list is Greater Manchester board members from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. I'm assuming it's because the window has closed for ours as to why ours isn't appearing on their website.
I assume that too, yeah.
Let's assume that.
Yeah, well, I definitely circulated the advert and everything else on social media, as did a number of other people that I know in the social networks, so that there was a strong advert that went out from Penna.
Nick.
Right. I'm speaking on behalf of the elected representatives of the business board, and it's just to say on this there is very much alignment with the business representatives, because as it was discussed with myself and two deputies, we both, all three of us, had concerns about the process that of potential recruitment, and so the issues you've raised, Nitin, were highlighted as a concern from ourselves. And also, although it may be restrictive, Richard, there was this desire to have have a recruitment process that did currently align with what's on paper. And I appreciate the paper's come, because it was a point of discussion to at least acknowledge there may have been difficulties, but a bigger push on the recruitment process would be appreciated by elected representatives.
Yeah, just to, as you can't see our hands, just to fully endorse that.
Great, thank you, Anna. Nitin, do you want to come back in?
The only thing I was going to say is, rather than wait, why don't we start looking? I mean, they should accept in a way if they've not delivered to say, yes, you should. Why? And all I'm saying is, if they come up with the best candidate, great. If they don't, I don't know what period you're talking about waiting. But what I'm saying is, why couldn't you raise it with another company at the same time? I mean, recruitment's hard, and you're facing it, but it doesn't mean we stick with the company who can't produce.
Yes. So, as an action, I'll take it to see if we can appoint another agents that can work alongside Penna. Penna are still looking. We had a meeting with them last week. We've told them to carry on the premise that this was going to be rejected. So.
Dom, I don't think you should have two recruitment consultancies running at the same time on this particular initiative. We've got my view, and the answer to your question is, if we've got a contract with Penna, we will have already paid a proportion of them. There's normally a sort of third type model on these recruitment consultancies. We've already paid for their services. The final payment doesn't get made until there's a successful candidate there. Given that this is public money, we should go back to Penna and say, look, we're not comfortable where we are. Let's push to try and see if we can find a better candidate. If that doesn't deliver, then I think you have to switch to another candidate, another recruitment agency. But I wouldn't have two running in parallel. I think that sends that really complicates the recruitment process.
I would agree, Andy. You can have someone ready, lined up, but I wouldn't go two at once. But I've got Vic and then Nitin to come back.
Thank you, Alex. I mean, my point would simply be, have Penna said, if you make these changes, we can get you a flood of recruitment? Or is it just that there's 2 or 3 candidates that fit these changes that we've said we should bring forward? Because we just advertised for my role, CEO of Cambridgeshire Chambers. We had over 100 applicants. I would say we had 15 of very high quality, but we have similar restrictions on being able to work and live in Cambridgeshire. So have Penna said this is the only barrier?
Yeah, no, that's not the intention at all. So what the intention is, regardless of if you change the constitution, we would still be required, because of openness and transparency and everything else, to continue the recruitment search because you're changing the requirements. So we wouldn't be able to not do that. That would be inappropriate. So what we would do is, if we made changes to the constitution, we would actually have to extend the process anyway, because people wouldn't realise that the requirements had changed, and therefore it wouldn't be a fair and open and transparent process. So they would need to understand that there was an opportunity that meant that they were not having a business interest in the area and that they could actually apply. So we would have to extend the process in any case, or start a new process.
Quickly, but have Penna said this change will cause more candidates to be available?
Basically, what happened was that a number of good candidates were found that Penna had talked to that didn't meet these requirements, but looks like candidates that you might want to take to a sift and then a process and an interview.
Thanks, Richard. Nitin, did you want to come back?
I was only going to say, I understand the cost side of it, but on the same basis, in my past life, we renegotiated and it didn't cost. I mean, you know, it's a big company, it's not delivered. So anyway, that's a slightly different way of doing business, maybe.
To try to sum up this kind of complicated set of issues, I think I detect no appetite to approve the constitutional change that's in the paper. And given that this would be a recommendation from the Business Board, we're going into the Combined Authority Board and the views of the elected members, which Anna and Nick have conveyed. It seems that, I mean, my preference would still be to just not take the paper, because actually the action we need to take is to go back and push Penna hard to really leave no stone unturned in finding someone who fits the existing criteria. And that, in a sense, is the key action that's to be taken. I can see your point, Vic. We might want to reject it outright, but in a sense, at this stage, we don't need to. And therefore, I wouldn't push to a vote on the paper we've got before us, because let's imagine a scenario where Penna go back around the loop. They really try very hard. We still end up with an empty set. We might want to consider some other options at that point. It probably wouldn't be the paper we've had before us, it would be a different one, but it could include this as an option alongside other options, and the board would be free to reject it at that point. So I'd rather defer than push to a vote unless there's a very strong set. I hear the strength of opinion around keeping the constitution we have, which I have some sympathy with too, but I don't think we need to take a vote on this today. So my preference from the chair would be to defer this and then take the actions we described. Are people generally content with that? Getting broad nods. Okay. Well,
You're getting a nod from me.
Thank you for the nods on screen as well. Yeah, and a thumbs up from Belinda. Can anyone else want to wave at me while we're online? There we go. Okay. Oh, Andy wave. That's lovely. Okay. Well, thank you. And yeah, a bit of work to do for officers there to really try to pick this up. But let's be really clear that we kind of expect Penna to step up to the plate here, and there may be, picking up Nitin's point, there may be consequences for them if we're not content with the process that happens.
Just that it's Mike, that we recirculate the advert, and maybe if we, because sometimes it's the product that's wrong, and it's acknowledging that as well, and there may be thoughts from the business board members that actually this doesn't sound like a great job. What if you made these changes? That type of thing. And how easy Alex found it.
And it is a great job, and it's a great job, and it's potentially, as we move into the kind of changes we're about to discuss on the Combined Authority, it's potentially one of the most influential roles within the area. from a business viewpoint. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can undertake have another circulation of that, just so we can have a quick look at it, but some actions to take forward. Thanks, Mike, for that. Okay, I think that therefore moves us on and takes on to item 3.3, which is the Business Board Annual Report and Delivery Plan. Domenico, I think this is with you.
Thank you, Chair. So today's meeting is our annual general meeting for the Business Board, and as such, we've got a number of obligations that we normally do at this juncture of the year, and not least, it's reporting on our annual report and delivery plan for the year just delivered and for the year going forward. So the members have been sent the annual delivery plan for 23-24 as an attachment to this paper. It highlights, like I just mentioned, it highlights the main achievements and key points delivered over the last 12 months, and then setting out, albeit in not too much detail in terms of what we're going to be doing over the next 12 months going forwards. Majority of that, as members know, is around embedding our new economic growth strategy and the implementation plan that sits alongside that, and other funding programs such as SBF, Levelling Up, and other things coming on board in the pipeline. So really seeking endorsement from the board to agree to the annual report, which will then be submitted to BEIS as our requirement to do so and published on our website. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dom. I've got one quick comment, which just rereading my foreword last night because of the news of Amir resigning. We ought to add his name to Faye and Jason's as being someone who's also stood down during the year, so it would be appropriate to capture it there. Tina.
I'm not suggesting that you change anything, but I was a bit disappointed that we have these sector strategies and we have actions under them and they're not mentioned. And so, you know, they're sitting there with activities that could be part of the future delivery plan.
Thanks, Tina. We've had this conversation outside of the meeting, and I agree we should be making sure we don't lose sight of the sector strategies, and they should be something that are being driven forward. And in fact, when we come onto the paper around the new committee structures, that may be a way in which that is done. Your point is not so much to change the wording within the annual report, but to make the more important point that we actually drive these through, having done the work on them, which I think everybody is nodding in favour of. Richard, do you want to just say anything on the general point rather than specifically about the report?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree that if you look at our directorate plan, the sector strategies are written very large and central to the future of our work programme, and we need to find ways and means of making sure that they are, you know, taken forward, and the next phases of their development are built up, and we provide some officer support to back them, particularly the 4 priority sectors. If you look at what's happening nationally at the moment with investment zones, if you remember the government announcement recently about investment zones and the 80 million for 5 years that places have got, the government's whole strategy is geared around sectors and their priority sectors. Our priority sectors match perfectly well onto their sector strategies. So it puts us in a really good place to pitch into the future, you know, for government funding. And even if we can't get the government funding that some of the other areas have got, we could at least get the fiscal advantages that are on offer. So I think our sector strategies are really absolutely key to weaving our way into some of those propositions and proposals into the future.
Thanks, Richard. That's encouraging, and Tina, I hope that's positive from your point of view as well. Any other comments and questions on the annual report and delivery plan from colleagues? Okay, in which case our recommendation is that we approve the annual report and delivery plan for 23-24 and recommend that the Combined Authority Board approves the Business Board's annual report and delivery plan to be submitted to the Department for Business and Trade. I think everybody's content. Let me know if you're not. Otherwise, I'm taking silence as assent, so that's fine. No objections. We can take that as carried unanimously. Thank you. So, Dom, I think we're still with you to present the report on the Business Board expenses and allowances.
Thank you, Chair. In a similar fashion to the previous item, we're also obliged at AGM to publish what the business board members have received in terms of remuneration and any expenses that we've paid in terms of our private sector members. So this paper, a very short paper, it just basically highlights over the last 12 months to the period 31st of March 2023, exactly how much has been paid out in remuneration to each member and any expenses paid. Again, this will be published on our website as part of our AGM requirements.
Great, thanks, Dom. I mean, relatively straightforward report. Anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah, Mike.
I was just going to suggest that as the constitutional arrangements and the committee arrangements change and that type of thing, then there might be some sort of thought for sort of recognising that within the remuneration, so people are encouraging people to sit on committees, if you like, by actually recognising that within how the additional remuneration, where additional time is being put in.
Well, you're raising a point about potential future changes rather than specifically on the report itself, which is a factual.
Oh, sorry, yes.
This is a factual presentation of the past expenses and remuneration.
I apologise, that is true. Yes,
Okay.
Hopefully not misspoke.
No, not. It's just that I think in a sense the thought is a perfectly legitimate one, and perhaps comes into the questions on the next item really about how all of that works under the new structures. But yeah, on this report, I think I'm assuming we're all happy to note it, and it will be published in the way that Dom suggested. Thank you, Mayor. Lovely. Okay, takes on to 3.5, and Dom, still with you. So it's going to be on the nomination of business board representatives. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And again, apologies, it's another AGM item that we need to do in terms of the governance of the business board. So at this juncture of the year, we have to just renew our representations onto the Combined Authority Board. As we know, the Chair formally sits on the Combined Authority Board and is covered by the Vice Chair of the Board. So this item is really asking members to agree that the Chair, I know, Alex, you're standing down at the end of this meeting, Andy Neely will assume that role in the interim until the permanent Chair is appointed. At that point, the Chair will obviously assume that role of representing on the Combined Authority Board, and the Vice Chair will continue to cover as substitute. So although we haven't got the name to confirm today in terms of the Chair, that will be confirmed once the appointment has been appointed.
On the interim arrangements, we have Andy stepping up to be interim chair following today, and Mike will be stepping up to be interim vice chair following today. So those are the kind of temporary arrangements until the new permanent people are in place.
I have no idea whether you can see us even waving at you, but I just wanted to say a huge thanks to Alex for everything he's done. And it was particularly, the way that Alex supported me when I was covering for Nick was fantastic. I really appreciate all of that, Alex. You've been a great chair of the business board. We're really sorry to lose you, but we know you're going on to great things. And Andy, thank you for stepping up. Really appreciate the extra work you're doing there.
No problem.
Thanks, Anna. I couldn't see you waving, but I could hear the very kind words, which I much appreciated. Thank you for saying that. And thanks everyone for my lovely card this morning, just while I'm on it. So that was good to have.
Can I just check, when I'm in the capacity of acting chair and Mike is acting vice chair, does that mean that Mike has the right to attend the combined authority board? Because I know previously we've had some discussion about whether that, not in this particular case, but I think in a previous occasion there was some discussion about whether we could have a substitute member for the combined authority board when I was last acting as chair of the business board.
Can you help on that?
I Mike the opportunity to attend the combined authority board if I'm unable to make it.
I think it should be okay for Mike to attend. Yeah, it should be okay for Mike to attend in Andy's.
They know.
Yes, Mike, I think. So yes, it's okay, Andy, just to confirm.
Great. If we could minute that, that'd be really helpful.
Sure, we can minute it, given that was the advice that Rena very clearly gave. Thank you, Rena. Vic.
It's a tiny little point, and sorry for raising it, but how did we reach a decision as to who would step into a vice chair role?
Given we expect this to be a very short period of time, it was simply a conversation that I had with some of the team and suggested Mike would be a good acting vice chair. Is there anything else you want to say on the paper, or do you want to move straight to recommendations?
Move on to recommendations. Thank you.
Are people generally content with the recommendations in this paper? So it seems to be a consensus in favour. If anyone disagrees, let me know. And I see no objections, so we'll take that as carried. Thank you, Dom, for that. Yeah, please do, Vic. Yeah.
Yeah, one question not related to that is it mentions the committees that we've got to put board members on. Where and how are we going to handle that?
On that.
Thanks, Vic. So that's going to be picked up under the governance item a bit later on the agenda. This was just to remind members that we're going to be making that decision.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Vic. That takes on 3.6. I'm still with you, Domenico. So, Tour of Britain cycle event.
Thank you, Chair. So this this item has been put before the business board because we were approached by our colleagues at Cambridge County Council, who are doing some great work on putting together a proposal to host a stop-start stage of the Tour de Britain cycle race. There's a team in place that are busy, obviously, working up the logistics around putting that proposal together. One of the tasks is obviously to identify if they can raise enough money to cover the costs of holding the event before they submit formally to the Tour of Britain organisers. We were approached as a combined authority to see whether we would be willing and able to sponsor the event. The amount being requested is 100,000, and that's to cover the costs of 84k plus associated fees with hosting the event. When we were first approached by the combined authority, we did explore options in terms of funding streams that could potentially cover this cost. In the first instance, we did identify that the enterprise zone income budget line did have some capacity within the budget to potentially cover this cost if it was seen as something that we should be funding as a business board and a combined authority overall. So what we're doing, this paper is just putting the request in front of the business board and members to consider the request and whether we would accept that and whether it's something that we should be doing as a business board and the CP combined authority. If there is something that we should be sponsoring and being engaged with, we should maybe identify whether that's feasibly to be funded from the enterprise zones or whether we go back to the combined authority and ask for any other budget lines that might be available. Looking at Rob beside me. Just as the paper kind of sets out and the appendices set out the value in terms of returns of being involved with sponsoring such an event, and this has been set out in the appendices. We're looking at over 4 million, up to £4 million in terms of income to the local economy. So you could argue that it would have a significant impact on the local economy on the day and the days surrounding the event. But I will put it to the board to decide if that's something that we should consider to fund. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dom. I'll come to Al Kingsley first. Al.
Thank you. I'm all for promoting healthy activity and lifestyle. I think that's really good. But I think there's an awful lot of intangible about how that use of public money is actually genuinely going to impact. I think it's very easy to assign the potential that it will add to the local economy, but I would argue, given the other topics that we have, that money could be better used.
Thanks, Al. And I think you put your finger on the key question here, really. These are enterprise zone receipts. There are uses to which those funds could be put, which could be a better fit with our overall ambitions around delivering sustainable and inclusive growth. And that was, when I was reading, that was the bit that I found difficult to reconcile with this being the best use of enterprise zone receipts, notwithstanding, feeling positive about the event and its potential generally, but whether this was the right source of funding for it was the thing I was left quite unconvinced by personally. Which,
Alex, that was my thought
yeah.
as well. I think this is a great project. We wouldn't love to have this happening, but these are enterprise zone receipts, and I'm not sure it's the right use.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. That was my view too. I'll come to Mike and then come back to Al.
I guess the thought would be that, is this a good spend of our marketing budget? We haven't got a marketing budget. And so it may be one for the future, in the sense that perhaps we need to have a marketing budget, if that's the way that it's sort of viewed on that side. But without having any opportunity cost valuation, it's very difficult to say why this would be the best spend of that money.
To Al and then come back to Vic.
Thank you. There was just one thought, which is this is something happening across the country in different stages. And I would question, like all the projects, they must have other sources of funding. So should our decision to say this isn't the right use of our funds, not that we don't support the endeavour, is there any reason to suspect this still wouldn't carry on anyway?
I should ask Domenico to answer that particular question. But I think the question we're asked here, to be really clear, is do we think we should spend EZ funding on this thing to respond to the request that's come via the County Council? We're not making a comment on the desirability or otherwise of the event. We're just asked whether we think this is the right use of those funds, which we have a decision-making role in. That's right, isn't it, Dom?
Just to answer your
Comment
question.
from Belinda.
Sorry,
Evelyn, let Dom answer, and then I'll come to you, and then I'll come to Vic.
So Al, just to answer your question, the event will still go ahead if they can make up the gap funding. It just means that we won't be involved as a combined authority.
Please go ahead, then I'll come back to Vic.
Sorry, was that me? Did you say Belinda? Alex?
That's you. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. I seem to recall when we discussed this at the last meeting, our question was around causality, establishing causality of the gearing around our investment with the 4 million return on investment. I have to say, I didn't get a sense of that from this paper. So if I'm missing something, perhaps we could expand that. But in the absence of that, I think I'm aligned with the mood music of everyone else around the table.
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. I'll bring Vic in, then we'll circle back to Dom at the end. Vic.
Thank you, Alex. So firstly, I'd like to know if we're contributing 84k plus 16 in VAT and expenses, what's the total investment from Cambridgeshire? And secondly, what have we done on the sponsorship side? Because the paper does offer hosts to go out and get sponsors if they want. So have we done any offsetting of this by bringing in sponsors for this event, which would reduce our investment? And my final point is, I don't care what budget it's from, it's the public money that concerns me, and whether it's right to be this budget or that budget, it's the principle.
Thanks, Vic. Can I just check any other comments from Business Board members? Nick.
I just wanted to say, from a mayoral point of view and from a mayoral priority point of view, there's a lot in this proposal that I personally like, and I would like to see the combined authority being supportive of this. Now, where we get the funds from, I am just a single member of the Business Board, and I absolutely accept comments made about public money usage and indeed business receipts. So in terms of what's in front of us as a proposal, if people around the table are uncomfortable with this proposal, then fine, I can understand that. But I would like to see, and I'll put it on record for my officers, that I think being involved in this is an important part of the combined authority's role. A mayoral priority has always been the idea of promoting public health improvements, addressing health inequalities, putting forward the idea of active travel lifestyles. I think we are in a lucky position that this is being put forward to us as an offer. I appreciate it would probably sit under a realm of selling the area, and that comes into a sort of different budget we don't currently have. Sometimes you have to have a leap of faith, and on this one, I would like to see a leap of faith from the combined authority.
Thanks, Nick. I think that does go back to the point I made earlier on, is the question that we're asked is this a good use of enterprise zone receipts? We're not making a judgment on whether it's something the combined authority should or shouldn't support, because ultimately that's not our call. But the question before us is that enterprise zone receipts question. Vic raised the... So I was just coming back to that. Yeah. So Vic raised a couple of important points which would be good for officers to respond to, which is around, are there other ways in which we could get funding in which would reduce the call on this or any other budget which the combined authority were using to support it? So I don't know whether you want to come back to that one, Dom.
Yeah, and just to endorse, I'd like to ask the same question, which is, given that we do think this is a good thing to happen, and maybe these receipts aren't the right way, the best way for that to happen, what else is available so that it can happen anyway?
So that's what I'm going to have to take as an action, Chair. Could look into that. Thank you.
Okay, and what I didn't detect from any of the comments from anyone was a kind of antipathy towards the general idea. I think the issue that people are not so comfortable with is whether it's good use of enterprise zone receipts. But it feels like there's some work to be done to take away to find other routes that could be utilised to find the funding that would allow the combined authority contributions to the event to happen. Do we want to go to a vote on this? Because I'm not sure I've captured everyone's views as to whether we as a business board want to support this with EZ receipt funding. Feels like perhaps we ought to. I think we ought to go to a vote on the matter, because I think there's probably differences of view. So I don't detect a complete consensus either way. So it feels like we ought to take a vote on the recommendations. So I think the first recommendation is we consider the funding request. We have considered the funding request, and we've had a conversation around it, including the wider points from a mayoral priority point of view, which Nick we note, which go into a wider question about the combined authority as a whole. The particular recommendation I'd like to get votes on is recommendation B, which is whether we as a business board recommend that the combined authority approve grant funding of 100,000 towards the hosting costs from the enterprise zone funds. So can I ask those in favour of that proposition to raise their hand? And I'll come, if I can raise hand in the rooms, I'll come separately to Andy, to Anna and to Belinda, but those in favour in the room. So I've got no one in favour. Is there anyone online in favour of the recommendation?
Just to check, I don't think I have your vote, do I?
Sorry, Anna, you don't. I forgot. It's only Belinda and Andy.
No, I'm supportive of the event, but I don't think it's the appropriate use of the enterprise zone funds.
Thanks, Andy. And Belinda, you in the same place?
I am. I'm against using the funds for this purpose.
Okay. So actually we have, thank you everybody. That was just good to test that. So I think we have a unanimous view that we don't recommend, we don't support recommendation B, but clearly there's some work to do to try to find other ways in which this event could be supported, picking up Nick's earlier points. Okay, thanks everybody. So Jodie, are you online with us?
I am. Hopefully you can all hear me.
We can hear you fine. Thanks, Jodie. So over to you to present item 3.7 on governance arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report today is to provide an overview on the changes to governance arrangements at the combined authority, and to highlight specific elements as they relate to the business board. Also, as previously mentioned, we're looking for the business board to appoint 2 nominees to each of the new thematic committees within the CPCA governance arrangements. Before progressing, I should make an apology to the business board and highlight an error or 2 in the paper has happened as a result of formatting. I do apologise for this. Recommendation G says paragraph 5.8, that should actually be 5.11. And H, instead of 5.12, should be 5.15. Hopefully the flow of the text in the report meant that this was understandable and wasn't a problem. So moving on, back in March at CPCA board, the governance arrangements paper was endorsed, and it was endorsed unanimously, which is a significant step in the improvement journey of the combined authority. paper set out new roles and responsibilities for the Combined Authority Board. It provided delegations down to the thematic committees and repurposed their terms of reference around the corporate plan, but also made some other changes to governance in regards to support for informal governance arrangements, that being officer advisory groups that can support the committee structure within the Combined Authority. And of course, it included elements relating to the business board and the change of role of the business board into a strategic advisory and engagement body moving forward. Now, the report is as presented, but I would like to highlight a few areas, if I may. The first of those being obviously the changes in our thematic committee structure. We are looking to really embed the business voice in wider regional democratic conversations in the Combined Authority, as well as give those thematic committees access to the business board and guidance, advice and views from the business board on topics. The process, the structure we've set up also has aligned the priority areas within the corporate plan to the thematic committees, and we would look and intend for the business board representatives to help push the achieving good growth considerations at the 3 thematic committees when they're considering other priority areas. Moving on. Sorry, I hope you can still hear me.
Jody, we just lost you for a second there. Is there anything your connection isn't wonderful? Is there anything you can do to improve it?
Apologies. Can you hear me now? Is that any better?
That's slightly better. Yeah. Do press on. Thanks, Jody.
Apologies for that. So as I said, within the report, also in 5.4, there are details around the purpose of the board, business board, key functions, and also key functions for the business board regarding the CPCA corporate plan. These were all developed through quite a long engagement process, which involved the business board. That engagement process obviously was very wide, involved all leaders, involved the mayor, as well as other key partners, stakeholders, and key officers within the Combined Authority. And it took into account, obviously, the Metro Dynamics report that was undertaken in regard to the future role of the business board. That helped obviously develop that content, which was, as I said, unanimously approved by the CPCA board. I would also like to highlight section 6 in the report, which touches on some of the future governance developments that are also in train. In particular, the intention to create an economic development advisory group. That will, of course, have a link into the Achieving Good Growth priority area, and so therefore should be available to feed into the business board in a 2-way process. And the work going on around the assurance framework, where we're looking to develop a single assurance framework approach that is completely common in other mayoral combined authorities, and will hopefully embed some solid standards, proportionality, and clearer roles and responsibilities and approval processes in the project and programme process within the combined authority area. So back to yourself, Chair, happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Jody. Are there any kind of points of clarification or questions for Jody? Tina?
Sorry, I can't remember. What happened to the business advisory panel? Because they're not mentioned at all, and presumably the people on it need to be informed that things have changed.
So I think, Richard, you might want to pick this one up around the work with the BAP, because there's been some conversations around that role and its function going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The business advisory panel will be reviewed as part of these arrangements, and taken forward when there's no intention to. It isn't seen as part of the formal governance, but we are actually reviewing all of the technical support at the moment, right across the whole of the combined authority, and that includes a review of all the different groups that we engage with, so that we get an understanding of the whole landscape. So business representation, wider business networks are really absolutely key to the way in which the business board operates. So the business advisory panel will remain, but it's subject to review.
So I'm really glad you raised the point, Tina, because I think under item H of the recommendations, which looks at paras 5.12 onwards and the 5.15 particularly, one of the points that we discussed when we had the joint session with the Combined Authority Board was about how do we make sure we are tapping into all those wider communities, and we can only ever do some of that with the membership of the business board because of its nature. We have the benefit of people like Vic who've got ability to tap into much wider business networks, which is great, but you're always going to have a constraint without having a huge board. So using other bodies is, I think, probably part of that answer. But it's always felt to me that group has not been as effective as it might be. So the review that Richard mentions, I think, should be hopefully trying to improve its efficacy going forward.
Right, there's been little or no communication with the business board, when in fact it's actually a very useful body.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was part of the review. We could set up either a small working group, but certainly we would want to engage all business board members in the review of the business advisory panel because of the strength of that relationship is key moving forwards. But we haven't even got to first base yet in terms of actually taking sense of how the business advisory panel has been operating, how it's been supported, who's been supporting it. What are its inputs? What are its objectives? How does it achieve the outcomes? And all of those sorts of quite big questions, but it is fundamental to the way we move forward. But we wouldn't be able to move forward without taking the business board with us, obviously.
Thanks, Richard. I'm sorry, don't which way around you. I'll go Al first and then Vic.
We talked through lots of these proposals, and I think it's healthy that it's on a journey. I do think it would be improper not to flag a note of caution that no matter what way you interpret it, it's very easy to look at some of the changes as diluting that core business voice. And whilst that is in some regards great, you want to have the broadest church of feedback and opinion, I think you also need to make sure that in doing so that it is still purposeful, both to be a business board member and that impact isn't lost in the broader voice of perhaps other direction of travel or agendas. And so, you know, I can see the importance of breadth, but I do feel there's a sense of, if you look at the next phase of governance change that you're looking at, there's a risk that you try and change too many things too quickly before you have any evidence that the impact is positive.
Thanks, Al. Vic.
I'd like to support what Al just said. I mean, the business advisory panel for me, if we're going to review that body, fine, excellent. But let's make sure going in we know what it is we need from it. So I wonder if we review what it's doing and how effective it is that even relevant if the business board has a different requirement? So, for example, one of the key things is it brings all the economic development officers together with business communities from each of the local councils, with the business communities in a way that no other body does. It may not have been as effective as it could be. Part of the problem is, as a business board member, I would normally sit on that group, but it coincides with my monthly board meeting, which means I'm not being able to provide that feedback. So the date has been an issue, but if we do review it, please let's not break that connection with the local authority economic development officers, and let's not forget the good value that panel can provide us if it's working properly, and not consider just because it's not working properly, we don't need it, it hasn't done anything.
Seems wise counsel, Vic, and I think, Tina, your point was not so much that there wasn't good stuff within the BAP, it's just that we hadn't got the connections properly back in. And, you know, you've mentioned your timing clash before, Vic, which has always been a part of that problem, but we can review these things to get it working better. But in terms of what we want it to do, I kind of think this does go, why I come back to sort of the recommendation H, is it's part of our response to 5.15, I think, is that we could really make the most of what is, I think, probably the only grouping where those people come together, including with the EDOs across the district councils, which is a really powerful network to have. Feeding it back in and making the links into here is really important, which if we get it right, I think, going back to your earlier point, Al, that could offset that risk that we get too diluted a business voice coming into the combined authority decision making. Richard.
enterprise partnerships right across the country are facing similar issues. You know, the future of local enterprise partnerships is under challenge. There's no, you know, the 150 million local growth fund that we had previously, there hasn't been a replacement of those investment funds. So it's put us on the back foot to some extent. But what I would argue is that the government is really keen on you know, that integration between combined authorities and the business voice. And if we can get that right, it puts us in a strong position to try and secure more out of devolution moving forwards and things like single settlements. And if we do get a single settlement moving forward and another devolution deal, should we get to that position, then I think we're in a good place to review how we move forward in terms of our governance. And we may, in fact, move back towards running big funding programs, but we're not in that space at the moment. It's really important that we get the business voice right to back the combined authority in its conversations with government. It's absolutely fundamental. It just won't happen without the business voice being behind the combined authority. It's absolutely crucial to the future of the combined authority, and crucial to our future funding. So I think it's really important that we try and make this advisory function work. And then if we can get into that next stage, next phases of development, we can reconsider exactly where we are.
Any other questions or thoughts for Jodie or for officers on the paper before us?
Alex, just a couple of quick things.
Yeah.
So I heard the comments Al made. I mean, I think that for me, there's two issues. One, I think it's really important that the business board and members of it continue to be a sort of independent advisory voice. We're not elected people applying for these particular roles. And I think so a bit of independence is important for us. It's also probably helpful for the combined authority, but closer working relationships are also valuable. There's no point having two completely parallel conversations. So I think we just have to watch that point. The two more substantive things on the reps for the different committees under 4.5, it talks about the business board appointing 2 representatives from membership to the 3 substantive committees. Will those reps, are they voting or non-voting members of those committees? And ditto for the combined authority board. At the moment, the business board chair or whoever is representing the business board at the combined authority board is a voting member of the combined authority board. There's been a little bit of discussion about whether that should be retained or not. So where are we on voting and not voting, both on the committees and the combined authority board?
Andy, Jodie, can you come in on that?
Yes, Chair. I mean, and the business board chair at the CPCA board remains a voting member.
Okay.
There have been no changes in regard to that. The 2 business board appointees on the thematic committees, they are co-opted members, which means at this moment in time they will not have votes at the committee. However, of course, those thematic committees should be operating in a consensual approach, and the issue of voting would hopefully not be a regular occurrence now that we have the corporate plan and clear direction, KPIs and actions for what they should be looking to deliver. But at this moment in time, yeah, co-opted members will not be voting at thematic committees, but business board chair has a clear vote at the CPCA board.
Okay, thank you, Jodie. That's helpful.
Nick, I think you wanted to come in.
Just to follow on about the thematic committees and as a kind of I guess a plea to fellow members of the business board. I mean, I'm going to be stepping up in the mayoral role to make sure that there'll be a mayoral presence at all of these. Up until now, I've only ever gone along to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. I think, although I know it will put more time and commitments onto members of the board, and a point made earlier, Domenico, about the importance of trying to get the replacements in sooner rather than later so that we can share the responsibility for that. But I think it's going to be a very important part of the improvement journey of the combined authority by having you as representatives of the business community on those committees going forward. And I think it will be invaluable going forward. So I'm very, very pleased to note that when it comes down to it, there will be 2 co-opted members. I will be there in my mayoral role, and hopefully that will give a strong voice for the business board as much as the business community. I just recognising the fact of those commitments required, and it goes back to the point made earlier that in terms of remuneration, we may well need to acknowledge that going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And that Mike, was, I think, the point you were raising, wasn't it, at the earlier juncture, which references these roles.
Yes, and also in part, there was a danger of stretching us too thin on that side. And I'm not quite sure what some of the other business board members, but I know Nitin and I do quite a lot of other things with growth works and that type of thing, which takes up quite a bit of time as well. And so that what you don't want to get situations where people get overloaded and say, well, I don't need to do this. And so whilst we are trying to recruit other members, and also being given guidance as to where we should prioritize our time to be most helpful to you, because that's why we're doing it in that sense. So it's not every seat on a committee or other sort of oversight is of the same value.
Great, thanks, Mike. Al.
I think Mike's point's really important, but I also think when we think about this will deliver change, I mean, I think there's quite a lot that has been happening already. I've chaired the Employment and Skills Board for 2 years. Dick's attended all those meetings. There has been different levels. So I think we need to be mindful of whether we're talking about somehow a fundamental shift versus actually this is a continuation of what we've been trying to do, but perhaps in a more structured way.
Really important point, Al, and I think nobody would want to kind of leave people any doubt that there hasn't been a huge amount of leaning in from business board members in all different sorts of ways to support the work of the combined authority and support the business community in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and our overall goal of delivering sustainable and inclusive growth. So that's absolutely the case. I think it's just that we're talking about it in the context of the governance shift that Jodie set out. We're starting to shift the combined authority into a different sort of role, which is what Nick was talking about, and how do we make sure that we're as fit for purpose as we can be in that regard. But just on the appointment of the business board reps to those 3 committees, I know officers have been having some conversations about possible people to be those reps into the new committees. Is there anything we can say at this juncture about where we've got to with those discussions?
Yeah, so I mean, Chair, I mean, if you so wish to do, you could invite for people to put their names forward based on the advice that we've provided in terms of our own local intelligence. Is the best way of putting it.
Good to have local intelligence. But so, well, tell you what we might do is. Sorry, are there any more comments on the paper before we come to that question about? Which is essentially recommendation B and the appointment of representatives, because I'll deal with that separately, perhaps. Vic.
Are we going to enter into this on a trial basis rather than it's locked in? Because I wouldn't want to, turn up at one of the committees, find I'm not there, being ignored, and only paying lip service to it. That's not what we're all here for.
Completely agree, and my understanding is that is exactly what we're doing. But Richard, or you might confirm. Yeah,
that's absolutely right. I think it's all for under review and to keep a watching brief on this. And, from our point of view, we need to just try and make sure that business board members are supported for those meetings. The challenge for us is going to be keeping ahead of the business of the combined authority. The combined authority's business is very broad, right across the range of issues that we're talking about. So that is going to be challenging. So we do need to keep it under review.
And Vic's point's fundamental, right? Because if it doesn't work both ways, then it doesn't work. So we're trying this, so we're going to have to be quite fleet of foot as we go into these new arrangements and amend them if they're not working. Tina.
I've probably missed this, but how often do these committees meet?
Jodie, have we got a time frame yet?
The thematic committees tend to meet 6 times per year. The dates for those will be published with the CPCA board AGM. I believe the draft dates for them were included in the March CPCA board paper on governance arrangements, which you can refer to. I would expect, obviously, once those business board reps have been appointed, that the CPCA will look to the committee, give them further support and advice around the committee remits and their role, as well as obviously speaking with them about the dates and how they can attend those meetings.
I think you sounded like you were underwater at the Peterborough Lido there, but I think we got the gist. So thanks, Jodie. So essentially, once every 2 months is the answer. Yeah, Mike.
Just going to say, is there a suggestion that might be worth having a sort of matrix of all the different things you're asking the business board members to do in terms of, I'm not sure whether the members on sector strategy groups or these other things as well, just so we can see what the full breadth of representation is that you want, so we can try and share it out as effectively as possible.
That sounds like an excellent idea, Mike. Is it something we can have a go at? Yeah, got thumbs up from officers on that. Thank you, Mike. Any other general points on the paper? Otherwise, I might try and step us through the recommendations, and I'll come back to point B, which is going to require a bit more work to go through and seek nominations. But items A, C, D, and E are all simply to note, and I assume we can note those quite happily. Item F is about agreeing the next steps in developing the business board element of the Constitution, which we had some conversation around. That's set out in section 5. Are we happy to agree that? I mean, it's in line with some of the conversations we've had before. I didn't detect any kind of discomfort with that proposal, but can I just check all are happy? Yeah, Vic.
A very small procedural point, because it's the AGM, we're not agreeing something for the next 12 months or anything silly. I guess we're not, given what was said earlier, but just to be clear.
I don't believe so, but I'll look for some support on that. We're simply agreeing what's before us in this paper, which could change at another point. Yeah, Rena's agreed that. Thank you. And then we asked to endorse the improvement actions set out in section 5 as well, around paragraph 5.8. And again, that's in line with what we've talked about before. So I'm assuming people are content. Yep. And then item H, we kind of had some conversation about during the discussion earlier around the matters raised by the CPCA board in 512. That was partly around the representation and how we make the most of tying into the different business networks, small businesses. And I think we had some useful conversation on that. It comes partly back to the review of the BAP that Dom and Steve and Richard were talking about earlier. So I'm assuming we're all right to take that as our first consideration of the response to that. There'll be more on that later. So if all are content with those recommendations A through H, it leaves us to the appointment of 2 business board reps for the 3 thematic committees. So I'm assuming, I'm looking to Richard for some help here, but am I asking people to put themselves forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be extremely helpful, with the proviso that this is for a short period of time, almost like an interim arrangement, and we'll keep it under review.
It's in line with your response to Vic's earlier question. So in which case, I'll just go through and ask for people who want to nominate themselves as representatives to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. Do I have any people who are willing to put themselves forward for that? So I've got Rebecca and Andy. That's a handy 2. So, well, I think we're delighted to have you as representatives. Welcome to the yes. Welcome to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, both. Thank you very much. Skills and Employment Committee. I've got Vic and I've got Nitin. I've got potentially 3. What do we do here? So I've got 3 possible candidates. I don't really want to go to a vote on this. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so we've got Vic and Nitin as two for Skills and Employment. Thank you. And Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee.
Yeah, I'll put my hand up, Alex.
Brilliant. So Belinda and Tina, thank you. So enthusiastically supported by the Mayor of the Combined Authority on all those appointments. thank you everybody, and in advance for your help with this. And I think just we'll hold Richard to his commitment that this will be reviewed actively so we can make sure it is working. There's obviously a big change. So thank you everyone for your support on all of that. Okay. Takes us on, I think, to item 4.1. And thank you, Jodie. Sorry, thank you, Jodie, for your support on that. Item 4.1 is really headlines from the meeting. Well, this will really be for Andy to take forward, given that he'll be attending the next combined authority meeting as acting chair. But I suspect, Andy, you'll pick up some of the reflections on the process we agree for trying to secure the new chair. Perhaps the point we've just reached on representatives to the 3 thematic committees as being some of the key points to take forward, as well as the general approval of the points in Jodie's paper. But you may have other points you want to raise. Does anybody have anything they want to make sure we carry forward into the next CPCA meeting from today? No, okay. Well, Andy, you can use your skill and judgment on that, but those are points that you might want to raise. And then 4.2 is the forward plan, which we have in before us. Does anybody have any comments or queries on the forward plan? And I'll take that as read. In which case, the next business board meeting will be on Monday, the 10th of July of this year, and I won't be with you. So good luck with that. Thank you all for your support during my time as chair. Nick.
Has already been alluded to by my deputy, but I will say it officially from the mayoral point of view. Alex, you've been a real friend to me over the last year, and what you have achieved in the last year has not gone without huge recognition from myself, both when I wasn't here, but also when I was here. I think I speak for everybody what you've managed to do, and to take the business board at a time, along with the whole of the combined authority, was under huge strain and indeed kind of observation from outside. And you really are the measure of somebody who walks towards a problem rather than sort of just going with the flow. So I'm very grateful for your willingness to stand up a year ago and take on the role, along with all of you as members of the business board who've been here a lot longer than I have as mayor. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you and all the best for you going forward in your career.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. It's very kind. Yeah, I assumed. That's the best finish that could have got though. There's a bit of a snide remark from Vic just to finish off. Perfect. Thanks everybody. So I think we're done. And yeah, take care all. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Good luck, Alex. Stay in touch.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good luck, Alex. Thank you.